Evelyn Carter had long mastered the art of composure, but nothing could have prepared her for the searing shock that day aboard SkyGlobal Airlines Flight 2187. The cabin, usually a sanctuary of quiet routine, erupted into chaos when a savage slap rang out like a gunshot. In that split second, the sound of skin colliding with skin shattered the fragile calm, leaving nearly 200 passengers frozen in stunned disbelief. At that moment, as Evelyn's cheek burned from the brutal impact, a deep, painful humiliation ignited within her, a humiliation that was all too personal and charged with the sting of 1,000 prejudices. Captain Richard Mercer, once regarded as the epitome of authority and honor, had stripped his uniform of dignity with one callous act of violence. His face, twisted with a sneer that betrayed long-held racist contempt, revealed a darkness lurking beneath the polished facade of his pilot's attire. Evelyn's hand trembled as it clutched her iPhone, the device poised to become the catalyst for a transformation that would shake the very foundations of the airline industry. Her decades of experience as a federal prosecutor had taught her to mask her emotions behind a steely exterior, yet the injustice of that moment clawed at her with a ferocity that could not be ignored. With measured resolve, she locked eyes with Mercer, a man who had, in that moment, become the embodiment of cruelty and discrimination. His reckless action was not merely an outburst of anger, but a deliberate assertion of power over someone he deemed inferior because of the color of her skin. The atmosphere in the cabin thickened with tension. Every passenger seemed to share an unspoken understanding that this was not simply an isolated incident, but a microcosm of a larger, insidious pattern of racism. As Mercer's hand remained on her shoulder with a threatening grip, Evelyn's voice sliced through the silence with the calm authority of someone who had confronted injustice her entire life. "You have exactly 5 seconds to remove your hand from my shoulder," she declared in a tone that was as measured as it was menacing. "After that, I'm going to make a call that will ensure you never set foot in a cockpit again." What Mercer, and indeed no one else, could have fathomed was that this was not merely a threat, but the prelude to a revolution against the deeply entrenched system of predators that had too long sheltered predators like him. As the passengers exchanged glances of both shock and quiet solidarity, the plane seemed to hold its collective breath. 6 hours earlier, Evelyn had navigated the bustling corridors of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had faced down more formidable challenges in her career. At 62 years old, she carried herself with a dignified confidence that commanded respect without ever demanding it. Her impeccably tailored charcoal pantsuit and neatly styled silver hair were testaments to a lifetime of resilience and perseverance. Clutched in her hand was a battered leather briefcase, a cherished reminder of her early days at Howard Law School and a repository for the file of Commonwealth v. Reynolds, a haunting case from 23 years ago that still shadowed her nights with its ghosts of injustice. The flight had been a tapestry of small moments. A warm greeting from Denise, the friendly gate agent who knew her by name, the gentle banter about family and the struggles of college life, and even a light-hearted exchange about the perils of modern travel, like the chaotic TSA lines and the absurdity of oversized cologne bottles. But all those mundane interactions now paled in comparison to the searing confrontation unfolding in the aisle. A young white man in his 30s had earlier displayed a subtle but unmistakable air of entitlement by invading the space of others, an attitude that mirrored the callous disregard with which Mercer now treated Evelyn. His indifferent glance and minimal movement were symbolic of a culture that often dismissed the presence of someone like her as an inconvenience rather than a human being deserving of respect. Even as the plane began its descent into turbulence, a momentary diversion from the looming storm, Evelyn's mind raced with thoughts of the decades of secrets and corrupt alliances that her single phone call was about to expose. That call was not merely a reaction to a personal slight. It was a meticulously planned act of retribution, aimed at unmasking the deep-seated racism festering at the highest levels of the airline industry. Each second that ticked by only intensified the simmering conflict between her and Mercer, the latter now revealed as an embodiment of systemic cruelty. His uniform, which had once evoked images of bravery and duty, was now nothing more than a symbol of the hypocrisy that allowed such acts of abuse to persist. While the flight attendants moved with routine precision, managing the chaos of overhead bins and last-minute seat adjustments, Evelyn's thoughts turned to the wider implications of her situation. The sting of Mercer's slap was a physical manifestation of years of microaggressions and dismissals that she had endured, a daily reminder that even in an era that touted equality, the vestiges of racism remained stubbornly entrenched. The passengers around her, caught in the shock of the moment, were unwitting witnesses to an act that encapsulated the bitter conflict between old prejudices and a new demand for accountability. A brief moment of camaraderie had flared when Tara, a spirited young woman with bright pink hair and an assortment of piercings, introduced herself with a reckless cheerfulness that belied the seriousness of the situation. However, even her carefree demeanor could not dilute the gravity of what had transpired. Tara's youthful exuberance contrasted sharply with Evelyn's measured resolve, highlighting the generational divide in how injustice was perceived and challenged. For Evelyn, every slight, every racist remark, and every unwarranted act of cruelty was a wound that required healing and, when necessary, a forceful reckoning. As the aircraft soared through the vast, cloud-strewn sky at 35,000 feet, the stage was set for a confrontation that was both personal and emblematic of a larger societal struggle. Evelyn's eyes never left Mercer's contorted expression, a mask of arrogance now marred by the realization that his abuse would soon be met with a response far beyond his wildest expectations. In her heart, she felt not only the sting of physical pain, but also the weight of every injustice she had ever witnessed, every case that had slipped through the cracks of a flawed system, and every moment when her dignity had been trampled underfoot. That single phone call was poised to ignite a chain reaction. It was a declaration of war against a system that had long tolerated racism and cruelty. The call would unravel decades of collusion, exposing secrets and conspiracies that reached the upper echelons of corporate power. It promised a reckoning, a spectacular, cathartic response that would leave not just Mercer, but every perpetrator of systemic injustice reeling. Even as the plane dipped into unexpected turbulence, Evelyn's resolve solidified. She would no longer allow herself to be a silent victim of discrimination. Instead, she would harness every ounce of her legal expertise, every scar of her past battles, and channel them into a moment of resounding, transformative justice. The turbulent ride became a metaphor for the storm that was gathering outside the confines of the airplane. Each jolt and drop was a reminder of the instability inherent in a world where racism still thrived. And yet, amidst the chaos, a quiet promise echoed within Evelyn's determined heart, a promise that the pain inflicted upon her would soon be avenged in a manner so grand and unyielding that even the most hardened skeptics would be forced to acknowledge the power of retribution when justice finally came calling. In that moment, Evelyn Carter was no longer just a federal prosecutor burdened by the weight of past cases. She was a warrior prepared to dismantle the structures of oppression and to force the nation to confront its deepest flaws. As the cabin slowly returned to a state of uneasy silence, the echoes of that fateful slap lingered like a grim portent. Every passenger, every whispered conversation, and every furtive glance served as a reminder that the battle against injustice was far from over. And as Evelyn's gaze locked with Mercer's for one final, charged moment, it was clear that this was only the beginning. The ensuing days would witness an unfolding drama of epic proportions, a drama where the scales of power would be violently upended, where the malicious cruelty of one man would be repaid 100-fold, by the resolute spirit of a woman who refused to be broken. This was the spark that would ignite a blaze of retribution, a blaze that promised to consume every remnant of discrimination in its path and leave behind a legacy of fierce, unyielding justice that would resonate with every soul longing for change. Evelyn Carter could still feel the echo of that fateful slap as the plane plunged into sudden, violent turbulence. The calm authority of Captain Mercer, which had earlier masked his cruelty, now shifted to a strained professionalism as he announced, "I'm turning on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please, return to your seats and secure your seatbelts immediately. Flight attendants, please take your seat." Even though his voice remained measured, Evelyn sensed a tension that belied his earlier assurances. The overhead bins rattled with a foreboding clamor, and a small child's cry broke the fragile calm, its sound mingling with the groans of frightened passengers. "Is this normal?" whispered Tyra, her earlier excitement replaced by a wide-eyed fear that gripped her as tightly as her white-knuckled hands on the armrests. Evelyn tried to offer comfort with a steady tone. "It's completely normal. Planes are built to handle far worse than this," even as the aircraft pitched sharply to one side before plummeting again. Screams erupted around them, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like eerie pendulums, swaying in slow motion. Tyra clutched Evelyn's hand so hard that her nails dug into Evelyn's skin, and in that moment, every person on board seemed to share in a collective terror that made the earlier injustice feel even more raw and personal. In the midst of chaos, Evelyn's voice cut through the panic as she helped Tyra secure her own oxygen mask. Leaning over, she guided a trembling young man across the aisle, whose eyes shone with pure, unadulterated fear as he struggled with the elastic strap. For several agonizing minutes, the plane bucked and jolted like a wild stallion before the turbulence began to subside as suddenly as it had struck. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, images of her daughter Maya and her granddaughter Zoe flickering through her mind. She had weathered so many storms in her lifetime, both literal and figurative, and yet nothing had ever pained her quite like this. The reminder of how quickly life could slip away at 35,000 feet, where even a federal prosecutor's iron will could falter under the weight of human vulnerability. As the aircraft stabilized into a smooth glide, the collective tension slowly began to lift, replaced by nervous laughter and whispered prayers. Captain Mercer's voice returned over the intercom, now apologetic. "We've cleared the area of turbulence and are now flying in stable air. You may remove your oxygen masks." I apologize for the scare, but for Evelyn, every soothing word was underscored by the memory of that earlier moment. The moment when Mercer's hand had struck her with a deliberate cruelty that symbolized so much more than a mere lapse in decorum. It was a stark reminder of the prejudice and abuse that she had battled all her life. No sooner had relief begun to seep back into the cabin than another crisis unfolded. Evelyn's experienced eyes caught sight of a woman 2 rows ahead, struggling to breathe. The woman, middle-aged and heavy-set, clutched her chest as her face flushed an alarming shade of red. Without hesitation, Evelyn called out to a passing flight attendant, a young black man named Marcus. "Excuse me, I think that woman needs medical attention." Marcus immediately sprang into action, kneeling beside the distressed passenger and asking in a calm yet urgent tone, "Ma'am, are you all right? Are you having chest pain?" The woman could only nod weakly, while her companion, an older gentleman with worry etched on his face, looked on helplessly. Marcus's concern escalated quickly as he called out, "Is there a doctor on board? We have a medical emergency." In a display of rare preparedness, a silver-haired man in the first row of economy rose and announced that he was a cardiologist, making his way to assist the ailing passenger. Before anyone could fully process this sudden medical drama, the aircraft intercom crackled to life once more as First Officer Collins explained, "We're making an emergency landing at Denver International Airport due to a medical situation on board. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." The ensuing moments stretched out with a peculiar distortion of time. as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. The doctor, alongside the flight attendants, worked with swift determination to stabilize the woman. Oxygen was administered, and a flurry of questions about medications and medical history filled the air, while the passengers, already on edge, alternated between watching the unfolding drama and anxiously gazing out at the descending Rocky Mountains. Tyra murmured softly, "My connecting flight is definitely screwed," though even her voice carried hints of genuine concern for the woman's well-being. Evelyn's heart ached as she watched the scene. A helpless husband by the woman's side, the frantic urgency of Marcus and the calm competence of the cardiologist. In that cramped airplane cabin, thousands of feet above the ground, human fragility was laid bare. She had seen death and despair in courtrooms and in the aftermath of terrible crimes, but the raw immediacy of life hanging by a thread in a confined space filled her with a deep, sorrowful empathy. When the plane finally touched down in Denver, paramedics rushed aboard, efficiently lifting the woman onto a stretcher and whisking her away with her worried husband trailing behind. A few passengers even broke into clapping, a spontaneous tribute to the heroism of the doctor who had stepped up without a moment's hesitation, though Evelyn's mind was still reeling from the earlier horrors. Once the emergency had been managed, Captain Mercer returned to the intercom with a note of weary professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mercer speaking. I want to thank you for your cooperation during our emergency landing. The passenger has been transported to a local hospital, and we're all hoping for the best. However, our aircraft will need to undergo a routine safety inspection before we can continue to San Francisco. This will take approximately 3 hours. You are welcome to deplane and explore the terminal facilities, but please remain at the airport as we won't be issuing any new boarding announcements. Simply return to this gate by 5:30 p.m. On behalf of SkyGlobal Airlines, I apologize for this disruption to your travel plans." A collective groan rippled through the cabin, a mixture of frustration and resignation over the prolonged delay. In the midst of the discontent, Tyra turned to Evelyn with a rueful smile and said, "Well, I guess we're going to be best friends by the time we reach San Francisco. Want to grab some overpriced airport food? My treat, since you had to hold my hand during that crazy turbulence." Under normal circumstances, Evelyn would have preferred the solitude of her case notes, but something about the shared ordeal had forged an unexpected bond. "I could use a cup of coffee," she admitted, though she quickly insisted on paying for her own meal despite the tempting camaraderie. They made their way through the terminal, and as they settled at a small table in a cozy cafe overlooking the majestic, albeit intimidating mountain peaks, Evelyn ordered a black coffee and a fruit cup, while Tyra opted for an elaborate latte paired with a massive cinnamon roll. Over the clatter of trays and the soft murmur of fellow stranded passengers, their conversation gradually turned from casual small talk to deeper, more personal reflections. Tyra inquired, "So why San Francisco? You mentioned you're a federal prosecutor, right? Is that where you're based?" Evelyn shook her head gently and explained, "No, I'm still in Atlanta. I'm just visiting my daughter and my granddaughter. My granddaughter is 7, and according to my daughter's text, she's prepared some glitter-based creation for my arrival. It sounds adorable." Tyra smiled, complimenting Evelyn on being an amazing grandmother, though her tone hinted at a curiosity that went beyond simple admiration. The conversation then took an unexpectedly tender turn as Evelyn recounted the complexities of her personal life, a life marred by both professional triumphs and personal sacrifices. "You know," she confided, "being the first in my family to attend college and law school wasn't easy. Back then, being a black woman in law meant you had to be twice as prepared, twice as professional, and twice as resilient as your white male colleagues." Her voice wavered slightly as she recalled the many battles fought in courtrooms and in the corridors of power, where mentors sometimes became unlikely allies. "I had mentors, including some white men who used their privilege to open doors for me, but that doesn't erase the constant reminder that I was an anomaly, a pioneer in a system that wasn't built for someone like me." Tyra listened intently, nodding in empathetic understanding before sharing her own observations from the tech industry. where diversity often felt more like a buzzword than a reality. As their conversation meandered through reflections on missed family moments, professional sacrifices, and the bittersweet nature of progress, Evelyn could not help but feel the weight of her past, a series of small wounds that had never quite healed. Yet, in that moment, the shared hardships of the flight, the terrifying turbulence, and the raw vulnerability in the face of a medical emergency underscored a larger truth. The world was still a place where injustice and prejudice reared their ugly heads, whether in the form of a brutal act by a pilot or the systemic biases embedded in every institution. And while Captain Mercer's earlier cruelty still smoldered in her memory, Evelyn's heart ached not only for herself, but for every soul that had ever been diminished by the callousness of those in power. By the time the long layover had drawn to a close and the terminal buzz resumed its steady hum of activity, Evelyn Carter emerged not just as a survivor of physical turbulence, but as a warrior tempered by life's relentless trials. She carried with her the resolve to ensure that every act of cruelty, every instance of discrimination, would one day be met with a response so grand and transformative that even the most hardened oppressors would be forced to reckon with the might of justice. And as she prepared to board the next flight, her spirit emboldened by the trials of the past hours, she knew that this was only another chapter in her lifelong quest to reclaim dignity and demand accountability, not just for herself, but for every voiceless soul in a world too long ruled by silent injustice. Evelyn Carter had just finished an engaging exchange of workplace banter with Tyra about career challenges, favorite books, political frustrations, and travel dreams when the shared experience of the earlier emergency landing began to melt away the tension in the terminal. The camaraderie that had briefly united a group of strangers now shifted abruptly when a familiar yet unexpected voice called out behind her. It was Marcus, the flight attendant who had heroically assisted during the in-flight medical crisis. His uniform was rumpled, and fatigue was evident in the lines of his face as he stepped forward. "Miss Carter," he said, "Captain Mercer asked me to give you this." In his hand he held a small, neatly folded note. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she accepted it, her eyes scanning the precise, angular handwriting that read, "I need to speak with you privately before we continue to San Francisco. It concerns Reynolds. Meet me at the cockpit during boarding. Cap R. Mercer." The word struck her like a thunderclap, and for a moment, the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. Reynolds, Calvin Reynolds, the man she had prosecuted 23 years ago for a series of brutally violent robberies that had terrorized Atlanta. A man who had maintained his innocence throughout the trial, sentencing, and years of appeals. And now new evidence had emerged that suggested, impossibly and unthinkably, that he might have been telling the truth all along. How could Captain Mercer know about Reynolds, and what could be so urgent that it could not wait until they landed in San Francisco? Before she could fully process these questions, Tyra noticed the turmoil on her face and asked, "Is everything okay?" Evelyn carefully refolded the note, tucking it into her jacket pocket with the practiced precision of a seasoned prosecutor who had seen more than her share of shocking turns. "Just a minor issue I need to address before we take off again," she replied in a tone that belied the storm raging inside her. After a brief exchange with Tyra, who jokingly asked her to save her seat, Evelyn sought out Marcus again, who was busy assisting an elderly passenger with a wheelchair. When she asked him, "How did Captain Mercer know who I am?" he looked momentarily surprised and explained that he had recognized her name from the passenger manifest. That simple explanation deepened the mystery. Why would an airline pilot recognize her name when her work, although occasionally mentioned in legal publications, rarely made headlines in mainstream media? And what did the Reynolds case have to do with this sudden clandestine message? Boarding was soon underway, and Evelyn's prosecutorial instincts screamed that something was not adding up. Despite a fleeting thought to simply return to her seat and let the authorities sort it out upon landing, her curiosity and her unwavering commitment to justice compelled her to act. When her boarding group was finally called, she made her way to the front of the aircraft, where the cockpit door stood slightly ajar. An older flight attendant with a tight blonde bun eyed her questioningly as she explained, "I need to speak with Captain Mercer. He left me a note asking to meet him before takeoff." With a nod of recognition, the attendant replied, "Yes, he mentioned you might come by." Evelyn stepped toward the cockpit, acutely aware that speaking with the pilot during boarding was a breach of the post-9/11 protocol, a fact that underscored the gravity of what she was about to learn. Inside the cramped cockpit, a compact space filled with a dizzying array of instruments and displays, she found Captain Mercer sitting in the left seat. He was a tall man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair cropped neatly and a weathered complexion that spoke of many days spent outdoors. His military bearing was unmistakable, and his eyes, intense and unwavering, locked onto hers as he rose from his seat. "Miss Carter," he said in a measured tone, "thank you for coming. Please close the door behind you." Though a flicker of hesitation crossed her mind, closing the door meant isolation from the rest of the aircraft and its witnesses. Evelyn, now 62 years old and hardened by a lifetime of dangerous and demanding situations, steeled herself and obeyed. Without wasting a moment on preliminaries, Evelyn said, "You mentioned Reynolds in your note. How do you know about that case?" Captain Mercer's expression remained unreadable for a heartbeat before his voice dropped to a low, controlled tone. "I know Calvin Reynolds is innocent of the crimes for which he was convicted, and I know you are reopening the investigation based on new evidence." Shock rippled through Evelyn. The review of Reynolds' case was a closely guarded secret, known to only a select few within the Justice Department. Her voice remained neutral, despite the shock as she pressed, "You still haven't explained how you know any of this, or what it has to do with you." Captain Mercer's jaw tightened. "Because I know who really committed those robberies," he declared. "I have known for 23 years, and I have kept silent while an innocent man languished in prison." He drew a deep, shuddering breath before continuing. "The real perpetrator was my brother, James Mercer." The revelation struck Evelyn like a physical blow. James Mercer, a name that had lurked in the recesses of case files, a potential suspect who had been quickly dismissed when multiple witnesses failed to identify him, was now being implicated in a conspiracy that spanned decades. "Your brother has been dead for 15 years, she said, recalling the detail from a recent review of the file. "Car accident, if I'm not mistaken." Mercer's cheek twitched in a mixture of pain and defiance. "Yes, he died in a car accident, or so everyone believed. But that's why I can finally come forward. There is no one left to protect him." His voice hardened further as he accused, "You allowed an innocent man to spend 23 years in prison to protect your brother." Evelyn's voice turned icy as her deep-seated sense of justice took over. "Do you understand that makes you an accessory after the fact?" she demanded. Mercer met her gaze without flinching. "I understand exactly what it makes me," he replied, his tone laden with regret. "I have lived with that knowledge every day, knowing that the man wrongfully convicted is black while my brother walked free because witnesses couldn't distinguish between two black men who shared only a general build and complexion." The weight of racial injustice hung heavy in the cockpit as Evelyn listened, her mind reeling with memories of a system rigged against people like Reynolds. She recalled how predominantly white witnesses had, time and again, misidentified black suspects, their testimonies colored by bias and ignorance. "The evidence against Reynolds seemed solid at the time," she said quietly. "Fingerprints, a partial shoe print, a witness who claimed to recognize his voice. But if you have information about your brother's involvement, I will need you to make a formal statement when we land in San Francisco." "I can arrange for local FBI agents to meet us at the airport," Evelyn continued, her tone firm with the authority of someone who had dedicated her life to righting wrongs. Mercer shook his head. "I have more than information, Ms. Carter. I have proof." Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small USB drive. "I recorded a conversation with my brother shortly after Reynolds was convicted," he explained. "He was drunk and racked with guilt, confessing to everything. On this drive you will find the audio recording, photos of items he kept from the robberies, and a letter he wrote but never sent to Reynolds in prison." He paused, his voice softening as he continued. "I have carried this with me for years, waiting until I was ready to face the consequences. When I saw your name on the passenger manifest, I knew it was a sign. I have been following news of Reynolds' case from a distance, and I knew you were the original prosecutor involved in the review." His eyes hardened once more as he added, "I'm retiring next month. I want to spend the rest of my life in peace, even if that peace comes from behind bars." In that cramped cockpit, every word felt like a confession that shattered the long-held silence. Evelyn felt a surge of righteous anger mixed with profound sorrow. How many more lives had been ruined by this same twisted system? How many more innocent souls had suffered under the weight of racial prejudice and familial betrayal? Mercer's admission of protecting his own blood, even at the expense of an innocent man's freedom, ignited a fire within her that she could no longer ignore. With a steady hand, Mercer held out the USB drive. "Take it," he said. "Review the contents carefully. When we land in San Francisco, you can decide what happens next." Evelyn's heart pounded as she accepted the drive, tucking it securely into her jacket pocket. The implications were staggering. This was not just evidence. It was a ticking time bomb that could expose decades of cover-ups, systemic injustice, and personal betrayal. "This doesn't change anything legally, Captain Mercer," she murmured, her voice betraying the conflict between her duty and the moral outrage surging within her. "If what you're saying is true, you've obstructed justice for over 2 decades. Mercer's controlled facade cracked for the first time, a flicker of raw emotion breaking through as he replied, "But surely you understand something about moral complexities, about family loyalty clashing with civic duty, and about mistakes that can never be fully rectified, only acknowledged." Before Evelyn could respond, a knock came at the cockpit door. The call for final boarding interrupted their intense exchange, reminding them that the flight, and the secrets it harbored, was about to continue. As Mercer excused himself to finish his pre-flight checks, his final words echoed in the small space. "Review the USB drive carefully, and when we land in San Francisco, decide how to bring justice for those who have been wronged." Left alone in the cockpit, Evelyn Carter felt the weight of the revelations settle on her shoulders like an anchor. Her mind raced with the possibilities of what the drive contained and the enormity of the task ahead. In that moment, she transformed from a weary federal prosecutor into a relentless crusader for truth and justice. The final boarding call sounded through the cabin, a distant reminder of the world outside the cockpit. A world where lives had been upended by injustice, where racism continued to poison the hearts of those in power. Evelyn knew that once they landed, there would be no turning back. She resolved to use every tool at her disposal to expose the truth, to ensure that Calvin Reynolds and every other victim of systemic prejudice would finally receive the justice they deserved. The revelation in that tiny USB drive was not merely evidence. It was a spark that would ignite a revolution that would dismantle the corrupt structures protecting the guilty and vindicate the innocent. As the cockpit door opened once more and the sounds of the bustling terminal filtered in, Evelyn steeled herself for the long, arduous journey ahead. Her resolve was unyielding, and her determination burned brighter than ever before. With the USB drive safely in her pocket and a heart heavy with both sorrow and righteous fury, she knew that her mission was clear: to bring forth a level of retribution so grand and transformative that even the most hardened oppressors would be forced to reckon with the truth, a truth that would leave every onlooker in awe and finally restore balance to a system long marred by injustice. Evelyn Carter listened as Captain Mercer's measured voice announced over the intercom, "We're ready for departure. Thank you, Susan. We'll continue this conversation in San Francisco." His tone was as calm as ever, but inside, Evelyn's mind was racing. She had just stepped away from the cockpit, burdened with revelations that struck her like a freight train. If Mercer was telling the truth, it meant that not only had an innocent man spent over 2 decades behind bars, but she herself had been an unwitting instrument in that miscarriage of justice. Every step back to her seat felt heavy, as though each passenger's eyes were silently judging her for a mistake that cut deeper than any single slap or harsh word could ever do. Settling back into her seat on the flight from Denver to San Francisco, Evelyn tried to steady her thoughts. As she stowed her luggage and sent a few hurried messages before takeoff, Tara's concerned whisper reached her ear. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Evelyn forced a smile and replied, "Just tired, it's been a long day." Even as Tara launched into a cheerful anecdote about spotting a famous YouTuber in the terminal, Evelyn's thoughts repeatedly drifted to the small USB drive now nestled in her jacket pocket. Its potentially explosive contents haunted her every moment, each heartbeat echoing with the possibility that the evidence could change everything. Captain Mercer's voice broke through the hum of routine flight updates as he provided progress reports and weather conditions. Each announcement was a jarring reminder of the weight of the conversation that had unfolded in the cockpit. Midway through the flight, Tara's tone shifted as she turned to Evelyn with unexpected seriousness. "Hey, can I ask you something kind of personal?" she said hesitantly. Evelyn, who had been gazing out the window at the sprawling landscape below, met her with calm curiosity. "You can ask, though I might not have all the answers." Tara's eyes, full of youthful honesty, inquired, "Do you ever regret any of the cases you prosecuted? Do you ever wonder if you got it wrong?" The question resonated with Evelyn on a deep level, stirring memories of endless courtroom battles and moments when the scales of justice had seemed all too precarious. For a fleeting second, she wondered if Tara had caught wind of the Reynolds case, though the young woman's expression was simply that of pure curiosity, without any hidden agenda. Evelyn admitted quietly, "Every prosecutor faces that haunting possibility. We work within an imperfect system, making decisions based on the evidence available at the time, and sometimes the possibility of error is unbearable." Tara's voice softened as she remarked, "That sounds really hard. Carrying that responsibility must weigh on you." Evelyn sighed and continued, "It is. There's even a case I'm reviewing now, a conviction from early in my career. New evidence suggests that the defendant may have been innocent." Tara's eyes widened as she asked, "Wow, what happens if he is innocent? Can you fix it?" Evelyn offered a measured response, "I can try." The legal process to overturn a wrongful conviction is complex but not impossible. The hardest part is knowing that even if he is exonerated, we can never return the years that were stolen from his life. Tara nodded thoughtfully, and after a brief pause leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "I have to confess something else," she said softly. "I've been talking non-stop on this flight because I am terrified of flying. Like phobia level terrified. Chattering keeps my mind off the fact that we are hurtling through the sky in a metal tube." The candid admission drew a genuine laugh from Evelyn. "Your secret is safe with me, and for what it's worth, you've managed to be remarkably calm considering everything." They shared a moment of lightheartedness, discussing favorite travel destinations and sharing humorous mishaps until the plane began its final descent towards San Francisco. Captain Mercer's voice came over the intercom again, announcing the final approach. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mercer. We have begun our final approach to San Francisco International Airport. The local time is 7:42 p.m. and the temperature is a pleasant 65 degrees. On behalf of SkyGlobal Airlines, thank you for your patience with today's unexpected delays. We should be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." At that moment, Evelyn's heart pounded with both anticipation and dread as she recalled the USB drive's explosive promise. Should she contact local FBI agents immediately upon landing, or should she first review the evidence to be absolutely sure it was credible? And what about Mercer himself? What was the proper legal response to his decades-long silence and his shocking revelations about his own brother? Her mind whirled with these questions as the wheels finally kissed the tarmac and the powerful reverse thrust of the engines signaled that the long journey was at an end. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers began the familiar ritual of gathering their belongings and checking their phones for messages. Evelyn stayed seated a little longer, letting the events of the day settle in. She knew that her daughter Maya and her granddaughter Zoe would not be expecting her for another hour because of the delays, and that gave her precious time to contemplate her next steps. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off and the cabin started to empty, Tara gave Evelyn a quick, unexpected hug before joining the exodus. Evelyn watched the crowd clear out, then rose to retrieve her briefcase from under the seat, her every step heavy with determination. As she made her way toward the front of the aircraft, Evelyn noticed Captain Mercer standing near the cockpit door, bidding farewell to departing passengers. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent exchange there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the storm that lay ahead. Evelyn offered him a subtle nod, a promise that their conversation was far from over. But before she could exit completely, a commotion near the front of the plane drew her attention. A white man in his 60s, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of corporate success, was arguing loudly with Marcus, the young flight attendant who had done his best to maintain calm earlier. "This is discrimination, plain and simple," the man bellowed, his voice rising in anger and entitlement. His face flushed with fury as he accused Marcus of neglecting his duty. "I have been flying this airline for 20 years and I have never been treated like this." Marcus, his professional demeanor strained but intact, apologized, explaining that he needed the man to step aside so that other passengers could deplane. The irate man, who introduced himself as Mr. Harrington, insisted that he had paid for first-class service and was outraged at being ignored while Marcus appeared to cater to the needs of other passengers. "Don't tell me to step aside," Mr. Harrington demanded, his tone condescending as he stood uncomfortably close to Marcus, using his height to loom over him. "I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." A small group of bystanders watched the unfolding drama with discomfort, their silence a mixture of fear and resignation. Evelyn, who had spent a lifetime navigating such discriminatory encounters, felt a familiar surge of anger. At 62, she was tired of watching younger black colleagues face the same battles she had fought through decades of silent pain and relentless struggle. Stepping forward with the calm authority of someone who had commanded countless courtrooms, Evelyn interjected. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" The man turned to her, momentarily thrown off by her unexpected intervention. "This doesn't concern you," he retorted dismissively. Evelyn's voice was firm as she replied, "It concerns everyone when a fellow passenger is being publicly berated for simply doing his job." Turning to Marcus, she asked, "Did this gentleman have a specific complaint about the service?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before explaining, "Mr. Harrington feels that his requests weren't given proper attention because you were too busy catering to your preferred customers." His words carried an unspoken implication as he glanced towards a black family seated in first class. The accusation stung with all the bitterness of past prejudices, and Evelyn's heart tightened in solidarity with those who had long been marginalized. Before the tension could escalate further, Captain Mercer stepped forward from the cockpit, his authoritative presence immediately drawing every eye. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, his tone cool and commanding. Mr. Harrington, seemingly expecting Mercer to side with him, launched into a tirade about the flight attendant's substandard service and his own special treatment as a high-paying customer. Mercer's response was measured and unsympathetic as he stated, "Marcus is one of our most experienced and professional flight attendants. If you have a complaint, you are welcome to contact customer service through the proper channels." Mercer then instructed Mr. Harrington to continue deplaning so that the crew could prepare for the next flight. Enraged, Mr. Harrington scoffed, "So that's how it is. You're all going to stick together now. I don't know what happened to this airline, but it used to understand who its important customers were." Mercer's gaze was steely as he responded, All our customers are important, Mr. Harrington, but treating our staff with respect is non-negotiable. Mr. Harrington muttered something under his breath as he reluctantly began to step aside. In that charged moment, Evelyn felt a profound mix of anger and sorrow. Here was a man, steeped in privilege and entitled to special treatment, confronting a dedicated employee simply for fulfilling his duty. It was yet another painful reminder of a system that had long devalued the contributions of people like Marcus. Evelyn's heart ached for the countless instances of discrimination she had witnessed and endured over her lifetime, and now, with the explosive revelations about the Reynolds case still burning in her mind and the USB drive a tangible symbol of the injustice that had plagued the system, she realized that her fight for justice was far from over. With every step she took towards the exit, Evelyn Carter resolved that she would not let the cruelty and prejudice of people like Mr. Harrington, or even the complicity of a broken system, define her legacy. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was determined to transform her sorrow into a call for retribution. A retribution so magnificent and overwhelming that even the most hardened oppressors would be forced to reckon with the truth. As she stepped off the plane and into the cool San Francisco evening, her mind raced with plans to expose the web of injustice that had strangled innocent lives for too long. In that moment, Evelyn was not just a retired federal prosecutor burdened by memories of courtroom battles. She was a warrior, ready to reclaim dignity, to fight for every voiceless soul, and to ensure that justice, true, uncompromising justice, would finally prevail. Evelyn Carter felt a chill run down her spine as she watched the sneer on Mr. Harrington's face, a look of pure contempt that no apology could ever wash away. As he brusquely brushed past Marcus, deliberately bumping his shoulder, Captain Mercer quickly intervened. "I apologize for that," Mercer told Marcus, promising to note the incident in the flight report. Marcus simply nodded, the familiar resignation in his eyes speaking volumes about the many injustices he had silently endured over the years. Evelyn had seen that same weary look time and again in the eyes of witnesses, victims, and colleagues who knew that standing up often came at a steep price. When Marcus quietly thanked her for stepping in, Evelyn replied with a gentle smile, "Looking away has never been my strong suit." Her words carried a quiet determination that belied the tumultuous emotions stirring within her. After exchanging a few brief words with Captain Mercer, who gave her a nod that said he would be waiting for her call, the moment was punctuated by a text from her daughter Maya. "We're at arrivals, Terminal 2. Zoe is bouncing off the walls with excitement to see you. Love you." For a fleeting moment, Evelyn allowed herself to set aside the heavy burden of the Reynolds case, Captain Mercer's confession, and the ugly scene of blatant discrimination she had just witnessed. She embraced her role as Grandma Liv, eagerly anticipating the joyful reunion with Zoe and the familiar, comforting rhythm of life with Maya. Yet, as she descended the escalator toward baggage claim, her mind could not escape the gnawing responsibility of the Reynolds case. If Mercer's explosive claims were true, she had a moral duty to right a grievous wrong, one in which she had been complicit, even if unintentionally. The thought was both professionally humbling and personally devastating, but beneath the sorrow, a small spark of hope glimmered. The possibility of setting right a past mistake, of finally shedding light on decades of darkness. It wouldn't restore the lost years or heal the deep wounds inflicted on Calvin Reynolds, Richard Mercer, and even herself, but it might at least offer a measure of redemption. 3 weeks later, Evelyn found herself seated at a polished conference table in the U.S. Attorney's office in Atlanta, the early morning light casting long, striped shadows through vertical blinds. The room was thick with tension as 5 individuals sat in measured silence. At one end of the table sat Evelyn Carter, her posture impeccably straight and her face a mask of careful neutrality despite the storm of emotions within her. To her right was Derek Patterson, the ambitious U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. Her superior in title, though with retirement on the horizon, the usual deference had long since faded. Directly across from her was Calvin Reynolds, now 52, whose once youthful face was now etched with the harsh lines of a prison cell. His eyes, though guarded, spoke of a deep, unyielding wariness that no amount of time behind bars could erase. Beside him sat Melissa Chen, a young and sharp-eyed attorney from the Innocence Project, whose dedication had spearheaded the reinvestigation of his case. At the far end of the table, noticeably out of place in a suit instead of his usual pilot's uniform, was Richard Mercer, the man whose confession had rocked Evelyn's entire world. Breaking the silence, Patterson began, "Let me make sure I understand the sequence of events. 3 weeks ago, on a commercial flight, Captain Mercer approached you with information about the Reynolds case, information he had kept hidden for over 2 decades while an innocent man remained behind bars." Evelyn's voice was steady as she confirmed, "That is correct. I reviewed the evidence Captain Mercer provided because I needed to ensure its credibility before initiating any action that could impact multiple lives." Her measured tone belied the heavy weight of responsibility that now pressed on her shoulders. Patterson's voice grew cold as he continued, "That process has now resulted in a motion to vacate Mr. Reynolds' conviction and potential embarrassment for this office." Before anyone could speak further, Melissa Chen interjected with quiet force, "The embarrassment stems not from your actions, Ms. Carter, but from the wrongful conviction itself." Patterson's jaw tightened as he retorted, "I merely want to know why proper protocols weren't followed." At that moment, Richard Mercer's deep voice resonated throughout the room. "The responsibility for this situation lies entirely with me. Ms. Carter acted with the appropriate caution and professionalism once I came forward." Patterson's eyes, however, remained unyielding as he remarked, "Your cooperation has been noted, Captain Mercer, but it does not erase 23 years of silence. While the statute of limitations may shield you from formal charges of accessory after the fact, the moral implications remain." Mercer accepted this with a slight nod, his expression somber, adding, "I understand that. I am not seeking absolution." All the while, Calvin Reynolds had been silent, his gaze fixed firmly on the polished wood of the conference table. Finally, he looked up and his voice, calm yet laden with sorrow, filled the room. "I spent 8,395 days in prison. Each morning I woke up knowing I was innocent. Each night I went to sleep wondering if I would die before the truth was revealed." His voice was steady, a controlled remnant of the survival skills honed in confinement. "I lost my wife. My daughter grew up calling another man daddy. My mother died believing her son was a violent criminal." The room fell into a heavy silence, each word hanging in the air like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Evelyn's heart pounded with remorse as she met his gaze. "I cannot give you back those lost days, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice filled with both regret and resolve. "I cannot undo the harm that has been done to you and your family, but I offer you my deepest apology and a commitment to see your name fully cleared." Reynolds' eyes, filled with years of pent-up anguish, locked onto hers as he said softly, "You know what is strange? For years, I hated you. In my mind, you became the face of all that went wrong. The detective who arrested me, the witnesses who identified me, the judge who sentenced me. They blurred together, but your face, your name, stayed clear." Evelyn nodded slowly, accepting the raw honesty in his words. "That is understandable," she replied gently. "But now that I stand here, I must remind you, I was merely doing my job with the evidence available to me. My duty was to seek justice, not merely to secure convictions." Reynolds shook his head slightly, his voice tinged with both bitterness and sorrow. "In your case, you failed that responsibility. We all did. And I unfortunately paid the price for it." Patterson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the shifting focus. "The purpose of this meeting is to discuss next steps," he announced. "The motion to vacate has been filed. The judge has indicated a favorable ruling given the new evidence. Melissa Chen chimed in. There will need to be a formal apology from the Justice Department, and Mr. Reynolds will be entitled to file for compensation under wrongful conviction statutes. No amount of money can ever truly make up for what you endured. Patterson quickly agreed. We will pursue the maximum statutory damages and explore all other remedies available. Then, with a calm that surprised everyone, Evelyn reached into her briefcase and produced a file folder. This is my letter of resignation, effective immediately, she declared. Patterson blinked in surprise. Ms. Carter, that is not necessary. No one is suggesting you bear personal responsibility for this situation. The evidence at the time appeared solid. Evelyn's eyes blazed with quiet determination as she responded, I am not resigning because I feel forced, Derek. I am resigning because it is the right thing to do. I have served this office for 30 years, and while I am proud of much of my work, this case, this mistake, demands that there be consequences, not just for Captain Mercer or for the system, but for me personally. She turned her gaze to Calvin Reynolds and added, I built my career on the principle that actions have consequences. It would be hypocritical to exempt myself from that standard. Reynolds shook his head slowly, softly murmuring, I do not want your resignation, Miss Carter. What good does that do any of us? You made a mistake based on flawed evidence, but you also helped set it right when the truth finally emerged. Melissa Chen offered her support, reminding everyone that many prosecutors would have clung to a wrongful conviction despite overwhelming new evidence. Your willingness to admit error and work to correct it is, unfortunately, the exception rather than the rule, she said, her tone both encouraging and resolute. As the meeting drew to a close, Evelyn's decision stood firm, a decision born from long, sleepless nights reviewing damning evidence and coming to terms with a legacy marred by a systemic failure of justice. In that moment, her resignation was not a retreat but a rallying cry for accountability. A spark meant to ignite sweeping reforms that would force the entire system to confront its deeply ingrained biases and the human cost of its negligence. With every word spoken, every tear silently shed, Evelyn Carter prepared to embark on a new chapter in her life. A chapter where her fierce commitment to justice would no longer be tainted by past mistakes. The weight of 23 years of silence, injustice, and personal sacrifice pressed on her heart. Yet it was that very weight that fueled her determination to set things right, to exact a retribution so grand that it would leave even the most callous oppressors trembling before the undeniable power of truth. Evelyn Carter stood before the boardroom table with a steely resolve that belied the turbulent storm raging inside her. She had just delivered her letter of resignation from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a decision born of decades of battling a system steeped in racial prejudice and moral compromise. Yet even as she spoke those words firmly, she made it clear she wasn't simply planning to retire. I've been in discussions with the Innocence Project about joining their legal team, she declared, her voice steady and resonant with the experience of a woman who had seen it all. In her eyes burned the conviction that her long, hard-fought career should end, not in quiet resignation, but with a final, bold act of retribution that would force the entire justice system to reckon with its misdeeds. Melissa Chen, a sharp-eyed lawyer from the Innocence Project who had been instrumental in reopening the case of Calvin Reynolds, looked at Evelyn with genuine admiration. "We would be lucky to have you, Miss Carter," she said softly, though she admitted that some clients might initially be hesitant to work with a career prosecutor. Evelyn merely smiled and replied, "Trust is earned, not granted," a sentiment that resonated deeply with the older, wiser souls who had watched decades of injustice unfold. Derek Patterson, the ambitious U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, sighed and muttered that he would process her resignation, though his tone revealed that he thought she was being unnecessarily hard on herself. But Evelyn knew that this wasn't just about one case or one mistake. It was about redefining the final chapter of her legal career on her own terms. a chapter that demanded accountability for a system that had wronged too many. After the meeting, Calvin Reynolds himself, now 52, with a face etched by 23 years behind bars, approached her quietly. "There's something I've been wondering," he began, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a lifetime lost. "After all these years, what made you review my case before Captain Mercer came forward?" His question was fair and piercing, reflecting the bitter irony of a man who had spent 8,395 days in prison, waking each morning in the belief of his own innocence, and sleeping each night haunted by the thought he might die before the truth could be revealed. Evelyn recalled the fateful day on the flight when a key witness, Marina Diaz, a frightened young woman pressured to identify him, had come forward with her recanted testimony. That conversation, filled with raw emotion and the stark realization of systemic bias, had been the spark that set the entire re-examination into motion. "Marina Diaz told me her identification wasn't voluntary," Evelyn explained gently. "She was young and scared, and later, when she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, she couldn't keep that secret any longer." Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, absorbing her words, as if they were the only lifeline to a hope he had long given up on. "So even without Captain Mercer's evidence, there might have been a chance," he murmured. Evelyn nodded, her heart aching for the years lost, and the family shattered by a system that had failed him. Lost time that no legal remedy could ever truly restore. Then, as if fate itself were weaving their destinies together, Captain Mercer approached after the meeting, his expression grave but tinged with reluctant sincerity. "I've resigned from SkyGlobal," he confided in a low voice, his tone revealing that his own conscience had driven him to leave before the truth became public. "After this, they would have forced me out anyway, and I'd rather leave on my own terms." He admitted he wasn't sure what his future held. His wife suggested community service as a way to balance the scales, though both knew that would hardly suffice for the enormity of his complicity. Mercer went on, his voice softening as he divulged, "I've been in contact with Sarah, James's widow. She has a trust fund for our nephew, and I've told her everything. That money, in any civil settlement, will likely have to go to Mr. Reynolds." His confession was a bitter pill to swallow. The revelation that his own family ties and the unspoken crimes of his late brother had contributed to a travesty of justice. Evelyn observed him carefully as he added, "My nephew, who is 19 now, is angry and confused. He doesn't want any part of money that comes from his father's sins." The raw honesty in Mercer's voice, mingled with the unrelenting cruelty he had once embodied, stirred in Evelyn a deep empathy for all those entangled in this web of injustice. Victims, wrongfully convicted men, and even the perpetrators who were tormented by their own guilt. Stepping away from the weighty discussions in the boardroom, Evelyn soon found herself in the bustling arrivals hall of Atlanta's airport. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "We're at arrivals, Terminal 2. Zoe is bouncing off the walls with excitement to see you. Love you." In that moment, Evelyn allowed herself a brief respite from the crushing burden of the Reynolds case and Captain Mercer's confession. She embraced the simple, unadorned joy of being Grandma Liv, savoring the laughter and the warmth of her daughter and granddaughter, even as the echoes of injustice continued to reverberate in her thoughts. Yet, as she rode the escalator down to baggage claim, she could not escape the nagging certainty that the truth about Reynolds would forever haunt her. It was a moral obligation, a burden that was both professionally humbling and personally devastating. To correct a grievous wrong, even if it meant reaping the consequences of her past actions. The news about the Reynolds case had exploded onto the public scene, and soon Evelyn's phone was ringing off the hook with calls from journalists, colleagues, and friends. But before the storm of public scrutiny could engulf her, she needed to speak with Maya, to explain not just what had transpired, but what her future would hold. The conversation would be painful, laden with the complexities of a life devoted to justice that was now overshadowed by an immense personal failure. As she stepped into the bright Atlanta sunshine outside the Federal Building, Evelyn felt a curious lightness in her step, a tentative hope that this new chapter might finally allow her to redeem herself and bring about the retribution that the system so desperately needed. Months later, in a small cafe near the Innocence Project's Atlanta office, a place that had quickly become her sanctuary, Evelyn settled into her usual corner seat. The rich aroma of strong coffee and the soft murmur of quiet conversation created a comforting backdrop as she methodically reviewed case files. The cafe, with its worn wooden tables and vintage decor, felt like home. It was here that Tara, her once vibrant pink-haired friend, now sporting streaks of blue and new piercings that spoke of an evolving self, slid into the seat opposite her with an exuberant grin and an oversized cup of caramel coffee. "Evelyn," Tara exclaimed, genuine excitement lighting her eyes. "What on earth brings you to Atlanta?" Her voice was warm and full of life, and for a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to relax. "I'm here to join the Innocence Project," she replied softly, her tone heavy with both sorrow and defiant hope. "I want to use my experience to help prevent or correct other wrongful convictions." Tara's eyes widened in admiration as she teased, "I saw your story in the news, the Reynolds case, your resignation. That's some serious life change since our flight together." Evelyn chuckled gently, adding, "Trust is earned, not granted, and I'm ready to earn a new beginning, even if it means paying for every mistake I made in the past." Their conversation drifted from work to memories of the flight that had changed everything. The turbulence, the searing injustice, the call to re-examine a wrongful conviction that had haunted Evelyn for decades. In that moment, as they shared stories and sipped their coffee, Evelyn felt the heavy burden of her past begin to lift. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was determined to transform her regret into a powerful catalyst for change. Every injustice, every life altered by the slow machinery of a biased system deserved an answer, a response so magnificent and overwhelming that even the most callous oppressors would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions. At 62, Evelyn Carter was not ready to simply fade away into obscurity. Instead, she was poised to ignite a retribution so grand that it would leave the public in awe. A retribution that would expose decades of systemic racism and moral failure, dismantle the corrupted pillars of power, and restore dignity to those who had been robbed of it. The next chapter of her life would be a testament to the unyielding spirit of a woman who had spent her entire career battling injustice, and who now had nothing left to lose but everything to gain by finally setting the record straight. And as she sat in that quiet cafe, the future shimmered with the promise of redemption. A future where truth and justice, however delayed, would eventually prevail. Evelyn Carter leaned back in her chair at the bustling cafe in Atlanta, watching the world drift by outside the large window as she recalled the whirlwind of events that had turned her life upside down. It wasn't entirely surprising that her friend Tyra had connected the dots so quickly. The Reynolds case had exploded in the media after the formal exoneration ceremony, one where the governor publicly apologized to Calvin Reynolds on behalf of the state. "Life sure has a way of taking unexpected turns," Evelyn murmured to herself, the weight of the past mingling with a cautious optimism for the future. Tyra, stirring her coffee slowly as if savoring every moment of reflection, leaned forward and asked, "So, what is it like working for the other side now?" Her tone was gentle yet curious, as if seeking both solace and truth. Evelyn sighed, her eyes softening with both regret and determination. "It's humbling, to be honest. It's challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. My prosecutorial experience is valuable, but it means I have to constantly question the assumptions I built my career on. Some of our clients are understandably wary of working with a former prosecutor, but I'm doing everything I can to make a difference, helping people like that Reynolds guy. We're trying our best." Evelyn's voice carried the bittersweet sound of someone who had fought hard for justice, only to later confront the painful reality of a flawed system. The legal hurdles to overturning wrongful convictions are immense, she continued, her tone heavy. Even with compelling evidence, every case we take on comes with dozens we have to turn down simply because our resources are limited. The system resists admitting its mistakes, and that makes every victory feel like a small, hard-won battle. Tyra nodded thoughtfully, her eyes reflecting both admiration and sorrow. You know, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation on that flight, the moral complexities and those irreversible mistakes that haunt you. It even inspired me to reconnect with my parents. We still don't see eye to eye on politics, but we're talking again. And that's something. The sincerity in her voice warmed Evelyn's heart. I'm really glad to hear that, Tyra. The conversation then shifted to updates on people they both cared about. So, what happened to that pilot, the one who came forward about his brother? Tyra inquired casually, yet with genuine concern. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before replying. Captain Mercer resigned from the airline. Last I heard, he's working with an organization that helps formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society. A different kind of atonement, I suppose. She paused, her mind wandering briefly to the irony that the same man who had once been an instrument of injustice had now become a reluctant whistleblower. And Reynolds. He's adjusting to life outside prison. It hasn't been easy after 23 long years, but he's reconnected with his daughter, and that bond has been meaningful for both of them. The state settlement will offer him some financial stability, though no sum of money can ever replace those lost years. Tyra's eyes darkened for a moment, and then, with a spark of hopeful humor, she said, "No, I guess it can't replace lost time, but at least he has a future now, a chance to build something new." Evelyn smiled softly. That's what we all have, ultimately, a chance to build something new with whatever time we have left. The path forward wasn't always clear, and the weight of her past mistakes would never fully disappear. Yet, as she walked briskly toward the Innocence Project office, she repeated to herself that there was work to be done, wrongs to be righted, and a future to build. One truth, one life at a time. Perhaps that, in the end, was enough. In quiet moments between meetings, while poring over case files at her regular table in that beloved cafe, Evelyn would reflect on the ironies of her life. Here she was, a former federal prosecutor with decades of experience, now dedicating herself to overturning wrongful convictions, cases that had once been the foundation of her career. It was a path filled with both redemption and a profound sense of responsibility. Every corrected mistake was a small victory against the systemic injustices that had cost so many lives, and every success served as a reminder that even in a world steeped in prejudice and cruelty, there was hope for a future where the scales of justice could finally be balanced. As the months passed and the legal battles raged on, Evelyn's story became an inspiration to many. She was a living testament to the idea that one could acknowledge past errors without losing sight of the greater goal of reform and retribution. The public began to see her not as a remnant of a bygone era of harsh convictions, but as a champion for those who had been wronged by a system that refused to admit its faults. In interviews and public appearances, she spoke candidly about the challenges of overturning wrongful convictions and the immense toll that systemic racism had taken on countless lives. Her words resonated deeply with an audience that included many women like herself, strong, resilient, and determined to see a better, fairer world. Looking out over the busy Atlanta streets from her favorite cafe, Evelyn realized that her journey was far from over. With every new case that came her way, every life that was touched by the pursuit of justice, she felt a growing sense of responsibility to ensure that the errors of the past would never be repeated. It was a future built not on the hollow promises of a flawed system, but on the tangible, hard-won victories of truth and retribution. And as she prepared for the challenges ahead, she knew that her story, her final, triumphant chapter, would be one that left even the most hardened oppressors trembling in awe of the unyielding power of justice. In that quiet moment, with the Atlanta sun warming her face and the promise of a better tomorrow beckoning, Evelyn Carter smiled softly to herself. She had come full circle, from a stern federal prosecutor haunted by past mistakes to a passionate advocate for those who had been silenced by an unjust system. And though the path ahead would be fraught with obstacles, she was ready to face every one of them, one truth, one life, at a time.